Okay, so tonight we are starting into Active Directory. We've talked a bit about it here and there, and thanks a lot. You made me panic there for a second. It's super small. What'd it do? Ah, dang it. So we've talked a bit about it here and there, so now we're going to be talking about it. We're going to talk about just intro and setups and some other things too. Okay, so the role of a directory service. And my cat is singing the song for people in the background, so if you occasionally hear them, that's what's going on. Network directory service stores information about a computer network and offers features for retrieving and managing that information. Generally considered to be an administrative tool, but users make use of directory services to find resources. Directory services provide a centralized management tool, but due to complexity, requires careful planning prior to setup. Windows Active Directory. Active Directory is a directory service based on standards for defining, storing, and accessing directory service objects. X500 is the basis for the hierarchical structure. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP, is based on X500 Directory Access Protocol, which uses the most efficient TCP/IP protocol. Integrating other OSs like Linux into an Active Directory network requires using LDAP. And that's just because you have to have something for them to talk to each other. Windows Active Directory was first used in Windows 2000 Server. It offers the following features: hierarchical organization, centralized but distributed databases, scalability, security, flexibility, and policy-based administration. So there's physical and logical structure. Physical structure consists of sites and servers configured as domain controllers, and logical structure makes it possible to pattern the directory services look and feel after the organization in which it runs. Physical structure. An Active Directory site is a physical location in which domain controllers communicate and replicate information periodically. A domain controller is a computer running Windows Server 2016 or 2019 or whatever version you've got with the Active Directory domain services role installed. Services one domain. Each domain controller contains a full replica of the objects, well, hello kitty, that make up the domain and responsible for storing a copy of the domain data and replicating changes to that data to all other domain controllers in the domain, providing data search and retrieval functions for users attempting to locate objects in that directory. Don't hit the mouse. Sorry. Cat decided to have some intervention there. Providing authentication and authorization services for users who log on to the domain and attempt to access network resources. Core organizing components of Active Directory are organizational units, domains, trees, and forests. So that should sound familiar. Organizational unit is an Active Directory container used to organize a network users, the users and resources into logical administrative units. An OU contains Active Directory objects such as user accounts, groups, computer accounts, printers, shared folders, applications, servers, and domain controllers. So here's an example. So this one, there's a marketing OU, and in this one, you've got your marketing group, you've got a couple of users, Scott and Amy, you've got some computers, you've got the marketing server, you've got the laser printer. Now you've got sales OU, with the same thing over here. You've got Bruce and Carrie, you've got your sales group, computer 1 and 2, you've got your color printer and your sales server 1. So each OU has its different things. A domain is the core structural unit of an Active Directory. It contains OUs and represents administrative, security, and policy boundaries. Small to medium companies usually have one domain. Larger companies may have several domains to separate geographical regions or administrative responsibilities. So down here, you'll see this like this pyramid. You have your admin OU at the top, and then if you have a multi-level domain, sometimes you'll have your subdomains that are part of that, that are in like sales OU and marketing OU. A tree is a grouping of domains that share a common naming structure, can consist of a parent domain and possibly one or more child domains. A forest is a collection of one or more Active Directory trees that provide a common Active Directory environment. All domains in all trees can communicate and share information. They can consist of a single tree with a single domain, or it can contain several trees, each with a hierarchy of parent and child domains. So one thing, they try to make it easy for you to be like, okay, a tree is in a forest. So just think of that as, the forest is the big thing, the tree is the small thing that, so just kind of remember that. Luckily, yeah, there is kind of a bad Hansel and Gretel forest joke in there somewhere. The largest forest, I have not worked with huge ones. I think the largest one that I've ever worked with was when I worked with the university. And that, well, no, that's not exactly true. The state police and the university are probably the biggest ones, but that was more of a geographical location thing, because of the university had so many different locations across the area that it was in, and then the state police had, across the whole state. So most of it wasn't so much the amount as the geographical, it's the geographical regions that we had to deal with. But yeah, something like the Navy, it's got your, like you're talking about there, you got your regions and bases, and yeah. So I have a friend, actually I have a couple of friends that work in different areas in the FBI. And so their stuff is significantly larger than anything that I've dealt with, because, you have your regional offices, and you have your state offices, and then you have your, they have larger regions where they have like Northwest and Southeast parts of the United States, and then they have regions within the states, and it gets really complicated really fast with organizations like that. Whereas none of the ones that I worked in the IT departments for were past the state level. But if you're doing like a military or one of the 3-letter agencies or one of the big government things, yeah, Southwest. But yeah, stuff like that. So has anyone ever worked with, besides like the military, has anyone worked with anything that's got the big forest, big tree type thing? Any other examples of big ones? We're all asleep. Is that just a no? Okay. So nobody really big ones. Yeah, Google and Fortune 500 Google's are, Google and Apple, theirs are massive, especially when NASA, that's another one. When you're looking at, especially somewhere that has Amazon, excellent point. Amazon's another one. And when you're looking at ones like Amazon and Google that have those gigantic data centers, theirs get big super fast. So those are just insanely big. Nothing that I've used would be considered large business. It would still be technically small to medium business. Yeah, that would probably be too. OpenAI. Yeah, there are some huge ones, and there are some I mean, like Amazon and Google, technically their stuff, when we think about it, we think, United States, but technically those are global. And there are some other stuff that you look at and they have just huge amounts of things all over the place. Okay, so here's some examples. This one's got a parent domain, and then you can see the two child domains, and each one has OUs within it. And then I will say I have worked in ones that have a couple of domains, but it was usually just to separate out stuff for user's sake. Like the school district had, I mean, they might have more now, but it was just easier for security purposes to separate out like the faculty, staff, regular users, and then have a completely separate domain for everything they did with students. Because, when you're dealing with students, especially students under 18, there are so many different legalities. So they decided early on, hey, why don't we just take another domain, and then we'll just put all these rules for these on a different domain. So that was one thing I was really glad that they did. Exactly, no elevated privileges. And then, because originally, before right when I started, it was decided before I was there that students would not even be allowed to have email addresses. But that went by the wayside very quickly, as I'm sure you've guessed, because so much is done electronically, and then there are so many different things like Google Classroom and things like that require an email address. So thankfully they had made that secondary domain, and so they were able to just add student email is a huge thing now, but luckily, since we had the two domains, we were like, no, we're just going to put our student emails in their own section of, student emails have their own domain, staff and faculty, we just split everything out because we didn't even want to mess with accidentally crossing over student and staff emails, because we have to, when you're dealing with K through 12 education, like you guys are pretty lucky in the college level, because you get a lot more access than any students in K through 12. If you've ever looked at some of the stuff they do, filtering for college students, they really try not to do that, because filtering, it really can mess up the amount of academic stuff that you guys can actually see. And unless it's like to filter out pornography on specific university computers, I think that's the only thing I've ever seen filtered before. Whereas when you're in a school district, they filter everything. It is insane. So, I mean, they had to be able to do all sorts of stuff. So having the dual things with the parent child domains was a huge boon. Yeah, we actually had someone, I won't say who, that said something about, you're trying to protect us from knowledge, and we forever made that into a meme, IT services protecting you from knowledge. So we were like, no, that wasn't even us filtering it. It was someone else that we had to open ports specifically for. But you know how when IT people hear something, they turn everything into memes, and you don't want to turn yourself into a meme with an IT department. It's bad. So yeah, multiple domains are really good for security separation. They're really good for, like, if you have multiple, like this one, they have the US and the UK for geological stuff. So they can be for all sorts of different things. Now this one right here, it shows here's your forest, and then there are two separate trees. You have your CSM Pub, CSM Tech, and you can see this one's got like the Asia and Americas, and this is just an excellent excellent graphical representation of what a forest with two trees looks like. So if you think about Okay, think about some of those big companies we're talking about with forests and some of the tons of trees that they've got to have in there. Okay, yes, technically those are pyramids in there. Pretend they're trees. So if you think about what those forests look like for some of the massive companies, then yeah, you get a little bit of a feel of why it is a good idea to keep representations like this so you can keep track of everything. All right, installing Active Directory. Windows Active Directory Services, can't speak, is commonly referred to as Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS. In fact, I don't know many networking people that say that. Usually they just say Active Directory. To install ADDS, use Server Manager. If DNS is not already present on the network, you must install the DNS server role. That's kind of a duh on there. After installation is finished, you must configure Active Directory, click the notification flag in Server Manager, and click Promote this server to ADC, Domain Controller. In the deployment configuration window, select from these options. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. Add a new domain to an existing forest. Add a new forest, choose this if it's the first domain controller in the network. Next, you're prompted for the fully qualified domain name, that's your FQDN, for the new forest root. An FQDN is a domain name that includes all parts of the name. In the domain controller options window, you will choose the forest and domain functional levels, select domain controller capabilities, domain name server, global catalog, read-only domain controller, enter a password for directory services restore mode, boot mode, which is used to perform restore operations on Active Directory if it becomes corrupted or parts of it are deleted accidentally. I'd like to say this doesn't happen, but we all know that's not true. Okay, so here is what this looks like. Here's your Active Directory Domain Services configuration window. As you can see here, you've got this one's Windows Server 2016. And you've got your check for DNS, GC, and RODC is unchecked. And then there's their password. In the DNS option window, you must create the DNS delegation, which allows Windows to create the necessary records on the DNS server for the new domain. In the additional options window, you specify a NetBIOS domain used for backwards compatibility with systems that don't use DNS. In the paths window, you specify the location of the Active Directory database, log files, and sysvol folder. Next, review your selections in the review options window. Windows then does a prerequisite check before starting the Active Directory installation. No, it's not the first window you'll be given on the VMs. There's some other this is just for Active Directory. When you first install VMs, it's just like when you do it for a like a Windows 10 or something like that, it'll go through that stuff first. Okay, so here's your Active Directory Domain Services configuration window that we're talking about. Where you want to put those. And your prerequisite check. Now, anywhere you see that little burnt, that go through and read and to see what's in there. My suggestion is anytime you go through there are times where you run through that and it's like, hey, you don't have this. Do you want to continue without it anyway? Don't do that. Fix it, rerun it, and if it comes up with something new, fix it, rerun it, because it's better to fix this stuff than it is to fix it later. In fact, one of the worst things that I've found when doing servers is if you do the prerequisite check and you don't fix things and then try to fix it later. In my experience, that's when you find problems that can corrupt your server configurations. Installing additional domain controllers in a domain. Hold on 1 second. I need to mute for a second. Sorry, kitty cat fight. Microsoft recommends at least 2 domain controllers in every domain for fault tolerance and load balancing. Installing additional DC in an existing domain is not unlike installing the first DC. The biggest difference is that you select add a domain controller to an existing domain instead of add a new forest. When a new DC is added, you need to know the answers to the following questions. Should you install DNS? Should the DC be a global catalog server? Should this be read-only domain controller? In which site should the DC be located? Okay, installing a new domain in an existing forest. 2 variations to adding a domain to an existing forest. You have your domain, your child domain. To add a child domain, you're adding a domain that shares at least the top level and second level domain name structure as an existing domain in the forest. Or add a new tree. You're adding a new domain with a separate naming structure from any existing domains in the forest. So as you can see down here, this one says add a new domain to an existing forest. Select domain type, child domain. And then this is the CSM Tech local, new domain name, Europe. And then you can see it has the option to change. You hit the change button for the credentials. And here you have tree domain, CSM pub local. You can see the new domain name. Is this making, I mean, I know some of this is probably overwhelming because, you know, when you slam through Active Directory quickly, it can be really overwhelming, but is making as much sense as possible? Okay, yeah, 80 is actually pretty cool when you start messing with it. Forests and domains, the easiest way that I found is looking at graphical representations. So they have some really good slides on here. Yeah, forests. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was probably one of the best slides I've seen for doing forests before. Okay, so installing Active Directory in Server Core. The preferred method is to use PowerShell commandlets. This is for Server Core. For administrators familiar with using DCP, let's DC promo exe, along with an answer file, this option's available. So you install Active Directory domain services role, and then you do that add Windows feature, AD for Active Directory -domain services. If using PowerShell, you should include the include management tools parameter, because otherwise you don't get your management tools. The next command starts the promotion process. The command you will use depends on the type of installation you want. Okay, so these are those run here. So start the promotion process, install ADDS for the Active Directory Domain Services Forest, domain name, and then whatever the name of your domain is. This command creates a new DC named CSM Tech local in a new forest. Now the next one, install ADDS domain controller domain name CSM Tech local. This command adds a domain controller to an existing domain. Install ADDS domain new domain name Europe parent domain CSM Tech local domain type child domain. This command adds a new domain to an existing forest, must specify new domain name, parent domain, and type of domain, which you can see down there. So you have your parent domain name, your new domain name is listed, and which type of domain, it's the child domain. To get detailed help using install ADDS domain, type get help, install ADDS domain -detailed. That is a very good one to write down. I'm going to leave it up there for just a second. So get -help space install -ADDS domain space -detailed. And that's one of those really good ones to add to your help, I need to remember how to do this sheet. Yeah, get help. That's why whenever I'm doing Linux, the was it -H works on most things. So yeah, same kind of thing. Okay, installing a DC with an install from media. When installing a new DC with an existing domain, it must be updated with all existing data in the AD database. I swear I'm not lisping on purpose. Using the install from medium IFM option can reduce the replication traffic needed to update. Procedure for using IFM: select a suitable DC from which you'll create the IFM data. On the selected DC, run the ntd sutil command line program at an elevated command prompt. Now, do you know what they're talking about? I should hope you do. When they say elevated command prompt, and do you know how to get there? Okay, so an elevated command prompt is a command prompt with admin privileges, right? Run command as admin, exactly. Yeah. I was surprised at how many people that I had when I was teaching new techs didn't know what I was talking about when I said open a elevated command prompt. So that's why I figured I'd ask. And then enter commands shown in a figure that we'll see later on. Install new DC and select IFM option. Then if you're using Server Manager, click Install from Media checkbox in the additional options window of the Active Directory Domain Services configuration window and specify the path to the media. So, yeah, domain controllers are part of Active Directory. So here's what this looks like. Your ntd sutil, and you can see that it's working through here, and it says, hey, where do I get this? Creating snapshot. Where's the source database? Where's the target database? Okay, I'm going to copy those registry files, and then you can see it copying them. And then later down there, you says, okay, the IFM media created successfully, and where did it go to? Right there, IFM data. What is inside Active Directory? So explore Active Directory using Active Directory Administrative Center or Active Directory Users and Computers. Now, I will say that I spent most of my time in Active Directory Users and Computers. That one just was easier for me to chug around in. You're going to go sob in a pillow fort. If you're going to go sob in a pillow fort, I suggest you get out a nice coloring book and some crayons. And I'm not being sarcastic. I think adult coloring books are fantastic. And I'm not saying pornographic coloring books. I'm saying the ones that are entertaining, like the ones that have giant swear words that you can color in, or unicorns, or weird things like that. They are very, very good. Use ADAC to perform the following AD tasks. Create the, sorry, someone just said MMC. I know it's not Multimedia Center, but for some reason that's always what my brain goes to. It's when you go into, it's one of the administrative tools that you can open. It's just when you go into Windows administrative tools, there's different options, and Active Directory Users and Computers is one of the options that you have there. So ADAC performs the following AD tasks: create, manage users, groups, and computer accounts, manage OUs, connect to other domain controllers in the same or different domain, change domain's functional level, and enable the AD recycle bin. ADAC is built on PowerShell. Each command you use in ADAC issues a PowerShell command. Use the Windows PowerShell history pane in ADAC to see a list of commands generated. Microsoft Management Console. Thank you. Yes. Yes, it is Microsoft Management Console. I don't know why I can never remember that one. I just know that it's part of that particular admin tool bunch. Okay, so this is the Active Directory Administrative Center, and you can use it, but I didn't use it as much because it didn't get down as granularly to some of the things that I wanted to do. So it really is just depends on what you're doing. And the nice thing it does do, though, is that Windows PowerShell history. So if you ever want to get in there and see how it's doing that, you turn that on and then you get all that down there. And you can see how to do that. So that is super nice. Do you guys want to see a picture of what hold on. Users and computers MMC looks like before I go on? Okay, hold on one second. Let me stop share and I'll go out and find. Server, I think the servers you have are 2016. Okay, yep, here's a good one. All right, let me share this with you. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of what it looks like. This is, you have your root, Active Directory users and computers. And then you can see you have computers, domain controllers. If they have Hyper-V servers, they have domain servers. You can see the different types they have out here. Usually you'll have your security groups and users and user groups are all broken out there. Under action, you have things. The reason I use this one was because it was much easier because you go into action and use the find command. Because usually I was going in to find and fix things for people. So I went in and used the action command and I would find whatever computer or user account or whatever it was that needed to be fixed. And then the MMC was just a lot faster because I had less things to jump through than I did with this. So when you're doing this type of stuff, it gives you tons and tons and tons of different options, which is great for, what you're doing here. But if all you're doing is trying to look at users and groups and computers, it can get a little bit too many options that are not related to what you need. So Active Directory schema. So an object, someone have a question? Okay. An object is a group of information that describes a network resource. The schema defines the type, organization, and structure of data stored in the AD database. Schema classes define the types of objects that can be stored in Active Directory. Schema attributes define what type of information is stored in each object. The information stored in each attribute is called the attribute value. So here's your example: schema class, Active Directory objects, schema attributes. So schema classes, computer account objects, domain controller objects, group objects, user accounts, OU domain. Active Directory objects, you have your computer account, your user account. Schema attributes, computer name, DNS name, description, user logon name, first name, last name, password. So I wish that whoever had done this, when I first learned about this, I had seen this. This makes it a lot easier to understand than some of the stuff that I've seen. The icons used to represent Active Directory objects. So a lot of the times they try to use generalized icons just to make it easier for the management, networking, whoever's looking at it, so they can go, okay, that's a site, that's a domain, that's a folder. So you can just tell by the icon what type of thing you're looking at. Active Directory container objects. A container object contains other objects used to organize and manage users and resources on the network, can also act as administrative and security boundaries. 3 container objects are found in Active Directory. You have your organizational units, your folder objects, and your domain objects. Organizational units, an OU is a primary container object for organizing and managing resources in a domain. OUs can organize multiple objects into local administrative groups that can be configured with specific policies relevant to that group. Authority of an OU can be delegated. Nesting OUs can build a hierarchical Active Directory structure that mimics the corporate structure for easier object management. And it's better to do it that way rather than trying to just randomly do it, because trying to make a structure that doesn't in any way mimic what your management, it turns into an absolute mess. I've worked with organizations where we've had to change over from one that didn't, and it was a nightmare. Folder objects. 5 are created by default, built in, houses default groups created by Windows, computers, default location for computer accounts created when a new computer or server becomes a domain member. Foreign security principles, contains user accounts from other domains added as members of the local domains group. Managed service accounts, creates specifically for services to access domain resources. And users, stores 2 default users, administrator and guest, and several default groups. Domain objects. Domain is the core logical structure in AD. Contains OU and folder container objects as well as leaf objects. Larger companies may use multiple domains to separate administration, define security boundaries, and define policy boundaries. Each domain object has a default GPO linked to it. Do you remember what GPO is? General policy. Linked to it that can affect all objects in the domain. The domain object in ADUC is represented by an icon with 3 tower computers. Okay, so they were just talking about leaf objects. So Active Directory leaf objects. A leaf object doesn't contain other objects and usually represents one of the following, which is why they're called leafs. They're at the end of everything. Security account, network resource, or a GPO. Security account objects include users, groups, and computers. Network resource objects include servers, domain controllers, file shares, printers, etc. GPOs aren't viewed as objects in the same way as other AD objects are. They are managed by the group policy management, MMC. So basically they're sitting there, but you just see them because the group policy management does anything that you do with that, because they have completely different options that are not able to be changed in the same way. User accounts. User account objects contain information such as group membership, account restrictions, profile path, and dial-in permissions. Authentication confirms a user's identity. The account is then assigned permissions and rights. Local user account authorized to access resources only on that computer. A domain user account provides a single logon for users to access all resources in the domain. Windows creates 2 built-in user accounts. And they mentioned this before, administrator and guest. A lot of times you want to disable guest and then create specific ones, because a lot of the guest parameters are generic, and a lot of security professionals and network administrators want specific things out there instead of just guest. A group object represents a collection of users with common permissions or rights. Permissions define which resources users can access and what level of access they have. Remember that least privilege right specifies what types of actions a user can perform on a computer or network. Groups are used to assign members permissions and rights, more efficient than assigning permissions and rights to each user separately. Now, can you imagine? Now, the school district that I worked at was considered small, I think, but we still had, with faculty, staff, and students, I want to say around 4,000 accounts. Can you imagine having to do all that by hand? It would make you cry.
Find someone else.
Yeah, exactly. It would very quickly be an I quit situation. Computer account. A computer account object represents a computer that's a domain controller or domain member used to identify, authenticate, and manage computers in the domain. Computer accounts are created automatically when Active Directory is installed on a server. Computer account object's name must match the name of the computer that the account represents. Otherwise, they don't talk to each other and you can't get access. Other types of leaf objects. Other leaf objects commonly created in Active Directory. You have a contact, a person associated with the company, but not a network user. A printer represents a shared printer in the domain, or a shared folder represents a shared folder on a computer in the network. Both printer and shared folder objects enable users to access shared printers and folders on any computer in the domain without knowing exactly which computer the resource was created on. Recovering objects with the Active Directory recycle bin. Active Directory recycle bin is disabled by default, but you can enable it in ADAC. After you enable it, the recycle bin can't be disabled without reinstalling all domain controllers in the forest. So make sure that you actually want to have it enabled. To use the recycle bin, all DCs in the forest must be running Windows Server 2008 R2 or later. To enable, you open ADAC, click the domain node. On the left pane, click Enable Recycle Bin in the task pane. And then you need to refresh ADAC to see the new container under domain node deleted objects. And then to undelete an object, you double click the deleted objects container, right click the object and choose Restore or Restore to. Locating Active Directory objects. Active Directory objects can be searched for using Find User Contacts and Group dialog box. So remember me talking about the action find. This is what I was talking about. You can search a single domain or an entire directory, which is all the domains. Not all objects are available to all users. It depends on object security settings in its container. So you see that find users, contacts, groups. You can also, and when you're in one of the other ones, there's you can search by computer names and things like that too. And then see where it says test domain local, you can change that. One thing that you can also do if you're using something that has generic naming conventions, you can type in a couple of letters and you can use things like asterisks and things like that in these types of searches as well. So that is actually kind of nice if you're looking for, say, multiple things that have similar characters in them. Working with forest trees and domains. Smaller organizations most likely focus on OUs and their child objects. Larger organizations might require an AD structure composed of several domains, multiple trees, and even a few forests. The first domain controller creates more than just a new domain. It also creates a new tree and root of a new forest. May eventually become necessary to add domains to the tree, create new trees or forests, and add sites to the Active Directory structure. Active Directory terminology. The next few sections examine terms associated with replication, directory partitions, operations masters, and trust relationships. Active Directory replication. Replication is the process of maintaining a consistent database of information when the database is distributed among several locations. Intra-site replication, replication between domain controllers and remember intra, in the same site. That's how you remember that. Inter-site replication occurs between two or more sites. So inter, two or more sites. So that's how you remember those. Multi-master replication, used by AD for replacing AG objects. Knowledge consistency checker, KCC, runs on all DCs to determine the replication topology, defines the domain controller path that AD changes flow through, and ensures no more than 3 hops exist between any two DCs. So here's an example of how that's done. So you see one, and you can see how it has the different things built out. And you can go through and look at that, but it kind of makes my eyes get crossed when I stare at it too long. Yeah, some of them have 3, some of them have 2, but you don't want more than 3. Directory partitions. A directory partition, each section of an Active Directory is each section of an Active Directory database. There are 5 directory partition types in the Active Directory database. Domain directory partition, which contains all objects in a domain, including users, groups, computers, OUs, and so forth. Schema directory partition contains information needed to define AD objects and object attributes. Global catalog partition holds the global catalog, which is a partial replica of all objects in the forest. Application directory partition, used by applications and services to hold information that benefits from. Configuration partition holds configuration information that can affect the entire forest. Operations master roles. Several operations in a forest require having a single domain controller called the operations master, with sole responsibility for the function. The first domain controller in the forest generally takes on the role of the operations master. If necessary, responsibility for these roles can be transferred to another domain controller. 5 operations master's roles, referred to as flexible single master operation or FSMO roles: schema master, infrastructure master, domain naming master, RID master, and PDC emulator master. Using PowerShell to view FSMO roles. To view the holder of the 3 domain-wide roles, use the following PowerShell command: get AD domain. And you can see that down there. To view the folder of the 2 forest-wide roles, use the PowerShell command get AD forest. And you can see those listed below. Trust relationships. I gotta say, trust relationships were the bane of my existence for a while when I was a building technician. In Active Directory, a trust relationship defines whether and how security principals from one domain can access network resources in another domain. Trust relationships are established automatically between all domains in a forest. Trusts do not equal permissions. Permissions are still required to access resource, even if a trust relationship exists. When there is no trust between domains, no access across domains is possible. So if you've ever had problems where your trust relationship has been broken in Active Directory between a computer and the domain or any other part, have any of you worked as an IT person and had to do anything with this? Have any of you seen this happen? There's a big nope from Nick. Anyone else? Okay, so it sounds like no one else. All right, so what happens is, first of all, I'll give you the rundown. You get a user that panics because they try to log in, and as soon as they log in, it says trust relationship error. And they're like, I don't know what that means, because that's not something that you usually see as a person. So they call the help desk, they freak out. help desk sends you out, you being me in this case. You go out and you go, yep, it's broken. And you have to call in and have someone purge the information from Active Directory, and then you have to reconnect you have to rename and reconnect the computer with Active Directory and basically force it to recreate the trust relationship, because otherwise none of the stuff, nothing works. You can't log in. The only thing you can do is you can get in with a local administrative, but that's it. It is tedious. It was probably not my absolute least favorite, because there were worse things to happen, but it was incredibly tedious just because it had a lot of steps, because it required a lot of restarts. Being Microsoft, you had to local log in, you had to clear everything out, you had to rename it to a work group and kill everything and restart it, and then you had to say, no, this is really where you had to, once you did that, you had to tell whoever on the other end, okay, you can clear it out of Active Directory, and then you had to go back in and rename it, and it had to refine the network, and then you had to restart it and convince it, yes, this is where you're supposed to be. So the problem was the amount of time that it took. So that's why whenever I see trust relationships, I still get an eye tick. The role of forests. All domains in a forest share some common characteristics: a single schema, forest-wide administrative accounts, operations masters, global catalog, trust between domains, replication between domains. At which point, if I have had multiple trust errors in the same building, I was very tempted to do that. The importance of Global Catalog Server. The first DC installed in a forest is automatically assigned as a Global Catalog Server, but additional Global Catalog servers can be configured. Global Catalog servers perform the following vital functions: facilitates domain and forest-wide searches, facilitates log on across domains. Users can log on to a computer in any domain by using their user principal name, their UPN, hold universal group membership information. The forest root domain. The first domain is the forest root and is referred to as forest root domain, which they've said multiple times. Imperative to the functionality of Active Directory. If it disappears, the entire structure ceases to operate. Thus far, and I'm just going to say thus far because there's always someone that manages to find a way. Thus far, I've never seen anyone manage to delete that. That's not saying that someone won't find a way. Functions the forest root domain usually handles are DNS server, global catalog server, forest-wide administrative accounts, and operations masters. Okay, so here is forest root domain. You can see that up at the top, and then you can see as you cascade down, the other ones. Understanding domains and trees. Adding organizations operating under a single name internally, an AD forest with only one tree is best. When two companies merge or a large company splits into separate business units, a multiple tree structure makes sense. Designing the domain structure. Most small and medium businesses choose a single domain for the following reasons: simplicity, lower cost, easier management, easier access to resource. Because in case you don't know this, each domain you manage costs money, because you have to register each domain, and registration costs per domain, and it's not particularly cheap. A single domain structure is usually easier and less expensive than multi-domain structure. May not always be a better solution. Using more than one domain makes sense or even is even necessary in the following circumstances. Need for differing account policies. So when I was talking about the students needing vastly different account policies. That's why they chose the different domains for those. Need for different name identities, replication control, need for internal versus external domains, need for tight security. Now, when there was the state police, I know for sure that they had internal and external domains. A lot of law enforcement, in fact, use internal and external domains. Introducing group policies. A group policy or GPO is a list of settings that administrators use to configure user and computer operating environments remotely. The GPO scope defines which objects a GPO affects. Installing Active Directory creates two GPOs by default. You have your default domain policy and your default domain controllers policy. You can view, create, and manage GPOs by using the GPO management console, so GPMC. Now, group policies, you can do so much with group policies. They're really cool, but you can get convoluted very quickly. So in my opinion, the less is more approach is best with group policies. So here's what the group policy management looks like. And here's we're under the default domain policy, and you can see, it's got some different drill down options here. Each GPO has two main nodes: computer configuration, which is used to set policies that apply to computers within the GPO scope. And then there's user configuration, which is used to set policies that apply to users within the GPO scope. Each node contains a policy folder and preferences folder. Settings configured in the policies folder are applied to users or computers, and they cannot be overridden by users. To change a GPO settings, you use the group policy management editor and open by right-clicking a GPO and clicking edit. They are surprisingly easy to edit, and there are tutorials everywhere. Computer configuration node. 3 folders under the policies folder contain the following information. Software settings enables administrators to install and manage applications remotely. Windows setting contains named resolution policy node, scripts extension, security settings node, and the policy-based QoS node. Administrative templates contains control panel network printers, system, and Windows components folders. Policies configured in the computer configuration node affect all computers in the container to which the GPO is linked. Be aware of that. User configuration node. Policies folder contains the same 3 folders as in the computer configuration node, but policies defined here affect domain users within the GPO scope. Software settings can assign or publish application packages. Windows settings contain 4 items. Scripts extensions, security settings node, folder redirection node, policy-based QoS node. Administrative templates contain settings that enable administrators to control users' computer and network environments. How group policies are applied. Okay, so remember this, GPOs can be applied in 4 places: local computer, site, domain, or organizational unit. Policies are applied in the above order. Remember that: local, site, domain, OU. Because I've seen that question in multiple places. Multiple tests I've seen this on. So remember that: GPOs, local, site, domain, OU. Policies that are not defined or configured are not applied at all. The last policy to be defined takes precedence. All righty. Now that your brain is mush, okay. Are there any questions that anyone has? Well, somebody just felt like they had to run away. I'm going to stop the recording.